Could a movie be so disturbing that governments, censors, and theater owners wanted it erased? In the 1970s, exploitation cinema stopped playing safe and started pushing audiences into territory many people called dangerous. These were not just violent films. They became scandals, court cases, seized tapes, and whispered legends. Today, we're counting down 15 brutal movies that crossed the line so hard the bans only made them more infamous. Number 15. Pink Flamingos, 1972. This was not just a movie. It was a dare thrown directly at good taste. John Waters built Pink Flamingos like a filthy little grenade, then handed it to midnight audiences and waited for the explosion. At a time when Hollywood was already getting rougher, louder, and more rebellious, this film went further by turning bad behavior into a kind of underground performance art. It was shocking, disgusting, absurd, and proudly anti-respectable. Divine became the center of the chaos, playing a character so outrageous that the film almost seemed designed to make polite society faint. Censors and critics did not know whether to treat it as comedy, trash, or cultural vandalism. But that confusion became its power. The more people called it offensive, the more curious midnight movie crowds became. Pink Flamingos was not brutal in the usual slasher sense. It was brutal toward manners, decency, and comfort. And that is why it still feels dangerous. Number 14. Thriller, A Cruel Picture, 1973. Some revenge films want applause. This one feels like staring into a wound. Thriller, A Cruel Picture, also known as They Call Her One Eye, came from Sweden, but its reputation spread far beyond its borders because it did not treat revenge as clean entertainment. The film follows a young woman whose life is destroyed by abuse, control, and exploitation before she transforms into a silent instrument of payback. What made the film so notorious was not just the violence, but the cold, punishing mood around it. It feels grimy, lonely, and emotionally frozen, as if every scene is daring the viewer to keep watching. Many versions were heavily cut, and its most extreme material helped turn it into a forbidden cult object. Later filmmakers would borrow its revenge imagery, but few copied its misery. Thriller is not an easy watch. It is a film built to disturb, not comfort, and that makes its outlaw reputation feel earned. Number 13. The Cannibal Man, 1972. The title promises savage horror, but the real nightmare is much closer to home. The Cannibal Man sounds like a jungle shocker, yet the film is actually a bleak Spanish exploitation thriller about panic, guilt, class pressure, and one man sliding into murder after murder. That strange mismatch between title and content helped create its cult reputation. Audiences expecting simple grindhouse brutality found something more urban, sweaty, and psychologically nasty. The story follows a slaughterhouse worker whose accidental crime turns into a chain of desperate cover-ups, each one pulling him deeper into moral collapse. Its violence, grim tone, and disturbing atmosphere made it a target for censorship, especially during the later video nasty panic. But what makes the film memorable is not just blood. It is the sense of a man trapped inside his own fear. The Cannibal Man is exploitation with a social disease underneath. It shows how horror can begin with one bad choice and end in total ruin. Number 12. The Last House on the Left, 1972. This is the film that made audiences ask whether horror had gone too far. Before Wes Craven became a master of nightmares, he made The Last House on the Left, a raw, ugly, low-budget shock film that felt less like entertainment and more like evidence from a crime scene. Its story of young victims, sadistic criminals, and brutal revenge hit audiences with a force that many viewers simply were not prepared for. The film had no glamorous monster, no gothic castle, no safe distance. It dragged horror into ordinary streets, ordinary homes, and ordinary parents pushed past the edge. Censors reacted strongly, and in places like the UK, its reputation became almost mythical because viewers heard about it long before they could legally see it. What makes it powerful is its roughness. It does not feel polished. It feels contaminated. The Last House on the Left remains controversial because it asks a vicious question. When justice fails, what does revenge do to the innocent? Number 11. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. Few films have ever looked this violent while showing so little actual gore. Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre became one of the most feared horror films of the 1970s because it felt less like fiction and more like something found in a roadside nightmare. The heat, dust, screaming machinery, rotting interiors, and documentary-style camera work made viewers feel trapped inside a world that had completely broken down. Leatherface and his family were not elegant villains. They were chaos wearing human skin, a vision of rural America turned rotten and cannibalistic. Censors struggled with the film because its terror was not only visual, it was psychological. Even when the camera cut away, the sound design and atmosphere forced the audience to imagine worse. That is why bans and refusals followed it for years. The genius of the film is that it created panic through suggestion. It did not need rivers of blood. It made viewers feel like they had escaped something alive. Number 10. Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS, 1975. Some exploitation films chase controversy. This one practically built a throne out of it. Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS, became the defining title of Nazi-sploitation, a subgenre built from prison camp horror, sadism, and deliberately offensive shock value. The film follows a cruel commandant figure inside a fictionalized camp setting, using historical horror as a backdrop for sensational brutality. That alone made it radioactive. Critics attacked it, censors resisted it, and many viewers saw it as proof that exploitation cinema had crossed from provocation into moral ugliness. Yet its forbidden reputation also made it infamous in Grindhouse circles, where posters, rumors, and heavily cut prints helped turn it into a cult object. What makes Ilsa so controversial is not artistry alone, but its willingness to turn real historical trauma into lurid spectacle. That is a dangerous bargain, and the film never escapes it. As exploitation history, it matters. As entertainment, it remains deeply uncomfortable. Exactly why it became so notorious. Number 9. Salo, or The 120 Days of Sodom, 1975. This was not a scandal by accident. It was designed like a political nightmare with no exit door. Pier Paolo Pasolini's Salo, or The 120 Days of Sodom, is often discussed as art cinema, but its banned reputation placed it beside the most notorious shock films of the decade. Set during the dying days of fascist Italy, the film turns power into a chamber of cruelty, where wealthy rulers treat helpless young people as objects to control, humiliate, and destroy. What made Salo so explosive was not just its disturbing content, but its cold, almost ceremonial presentation. Pasolini was not trying to entertain the audience. He was accusing them, trapping them, and forcing them to look at what absolute power does when morality disappears. Censors across the world reacted with bans, cuts, and outrage, while critics argued over whether the film was a masterpiece or a moral assault. That argument still follows it today. Salo remains infamous because it does not offer revenge, escape, or comfort. It simply shows a world where power wins, and that is why it still feels poisonous. Number 8. Night Train Murders, 1975. The most terrifying journey in exploitation cinema begins with ordinary passengers and ends like a warning nobody wanted to hear. Night Train Murders is often compared to The Last House on the Left, but this Italian shock thriller has its own cold, European cruelty. The setup is simple. Two young women board a train, expecting travel, safety, and routine. Instead, the night becomes a claustrophobic trap where violence, manipulation, and class tension close in around them. What makes the film so disturbing is the way it turns public space into danger. A train should be full of witnesses, movement, and escape routes, but here it becomes a sealed corridor of dread. The film was targeted by censors because of its bleak assault, brutal revenge angle, and uncomfortably realistic tone. But beneath the exploitation surface, there is a sharp social poison. The villains are not monsters from another world. They are products of entitlement, cruelty, and moral emptiness. Night Train Murders leaves a nasty aftertaste because it suggests civilization can collapse in one locked compartment. It is ugly, harsh, and effective. Exactly the kind of film censorship boards feared. Number 7. SS Experiment Camp, 1976. Some movies become infamous because they shock the audience. This one became infamous because people questioned whether it should exist at all. SS Experiment Camp sits deep inside the Nazi-exploitation cycle, a grimy subgenre that used wartime imagery, prison camp settings, and sadistic authority figures to sell forbidden thrills. The film became notorious not because it handled history with care, but because it turned suffering into exploitation spectacle. That is the uncomfortable truth behind its reputation. Audiences drawn by scandal found a movie built around cruelty, captivity, and power used in the ugliest way possible. Censors saw it as offensive, tasteless, and inflammatory, and its later connection to the video nasty panic made the title even more notorious. But the controversy also made the film valuable to collectors of forbidden cinema, proving how censorship can accidentally transform trash into legend. SS Experiment Camp is not remembered for emotional depth or great filmmaking. It is remembered as evidence of how far exploitation producers were willing to go when the market rewarded outrage. Its legacy is simple and brutal. When shock becomes the selling point, dignity is usually the first victim. Number 6. Island of Death, 1976. This is the kind of film that feels less written than dared into existence. Island of Death came from Greece and quickly earned a reputation as one of the most aggressively transgressive exploitation films of the decade. On the surface, it uses the beauty of a sunlit island setting, white buildings, open skies, peaceful streets, then corrupts that calm with a story full of murder, abuse, obsession, and moral decay. That contrast is what makes the film so strange. It does not hide its ugliness in dark alleys. It places it under bright daylight, making the viewer feel as if something rotten is happening in paradise. The film became heavily targeted during the UK video nasty era, where its reputation grew larger than its actual audience. Many people knew the title only as something forbidden, something whispered about in cult horror circles. What makes Island of Death memorable is its reckless desire to offend almost everyone. It is not subtle, polished, or tasteful. But exploitation history is full of films that gained power by being exactly what polite culture rejected. This one became infamous because it seemed proud of crossing every line. Number 5. The Driller Killer, 1979. This is the film that proved a title, a poster, and one ugly idea could terrify censors before audiences even pressed play. The Driller Killer came from Abel Ferrara's grimy New York underground, where art, poverty, madness, and violence all seem to rot inside the same apartment walls. The story follows a struggling painter whose mind slowly collapses under noise, pressure, unpaid bills, and creative frustration, until the city around him begins to feel like a disease crawling into his skull. What made the film notorious was not just its attacks, but its dirty, unstable atmosphere. It feels like a nervous breakdown filmed on cheap stock, full of punk energy, urban decay, and the sense that nobody is coming to save anyone. In Britain, its reputation exploded during the video nasty panic, where the film became one of the titles linked again and again with censorship hysteria. The shocking artwork and violent image helped turn it into a forbidden object before many people had even seen it. The Driller Killer survives because it captures exploitation cinema at its most dangerous: cheap, raw, angry, and impossible to ignore. Number 4. Faces of Death, 1978. This was the film that sold itself as forbidden evidence, and millions wanted to believe the warning label. Faces of Death arrived with one of the most dangerous hooks in exploitation history: the idea that audiences were not watching normal horror, but a collection of real death footage, accidents, autopsies, rituals, and human cruelty caught on camera. That promise made it infamous almost overnight. Some sequences were staged, some were documentary-like, and some were built to blur the lines so aggressively that viewers could not easily separate truth from performance. That uncertainty became the movie's real weapon. It did not need a traditional villain, because the villain was the possibility that the world itself was this cruel. Censors, moral groups, and shocked viewers treated it like something toxic, while its marketing leaned into the idea that it had been banned or hidden around the world. Whether every claim was true or exaggerated, almost did not matter. The legend had already escaped. Faces of Death helped create the appetite for shockumentaries, Mondo films, and too real to watch horror. It remains disturbing not because it is always convincing, but because it understood something brutal about audiences. Tell people they are not allowed to see something, and curiosity becomes almost impossible to control. Number 3. I Spit on Your Grave, 1978. This is one of those films people do not simply watch. They argue with it, recoil from it, and remember it for years. I Spit on Your Grave became one of the most controversial exploitation films ever made because it pushed the rape revenge formula into territory many critics considered unbearable. The story follows a woman who survives a horrific attack, then returns with a cold and methodical desire for revenge. But the reason the film became infamous is not just the revenge. It is the long, punishing build-up, the raw lack of comfort, and the way the movie forces the viewer into an ugly moral space where pain becomes the engine of justice. Many censors saw it as exploitative and degrading, while defenders argued that its revenge structure gave the victim power in a genre often built on cruelty. That debate never really ended. The film became a major video nasty title, repeatedly cut, seized, condemned, and discussed as proof of cinema's ability to disturb beyond entertainment. I Spit on Your Grave is not remembered because it is pleasant, polished, or easy to defend. It is remembered because it exposed a raw nerve in exploitation cinema. When a movie uses suffering to create revenge satisfaction, does it condemn violence or sell it? That question still makes the film dangerous. Number 2. Caligula, 1979. This was not just a movie production, it was a cinematic power struggle that collapsed into scandal. Caligula had the ingredients of prestige, serious actors, expensive sets, Roman history, political corruption, and a story about absolute power destroying the human soul. But behind the scenes, the film became one of the strangest disasters of the decade, where art house ambition, exploitation marketing, and explicit shock value fought for control of the final product. The result was a film that looked expensive but felt lawless, a historical epic dragged into the territory of controversy, lawsuits, censorship, and international bans. Malcolm McDowell's performance gave the Emperor a frightening mix of charm, madness, and cruelty, while the production design tried to create a world drowning in luxury and moral rot. But the film's most notorious material overshadowed almost everything else. Many critics dismissed it as vulgar excess, while cult audiences saw it as a uniquely bizarre monument to the limits of independent filmmaking. Caligula remains fascinating because it feels like the very thing it portrays: power with no restraint. It wanted to be history, scandal, philosophy, and spectacle all at once. Instead, it became something even more unforgettable: a grand, expensive warning about what happens when nobody can agree where the line is. Number 1. Zombie Flesh Eaters, Zombie 2, 1979. This is the zombie film that did not knock politely on the door. It clawed its way into censorship history. Lucio Fulci's Zombie Flesh Eaters, also known as Zombie 2, became one of the defining Italian horror shocks of the late 70s because it delivered exactly what exploitation audiences were secretly chasing: tropical dread, rotting corpses, forbidden rituals, and gore staged with operatic confidence. The film was marketed in some places as a follow-up to Dawn of the Dead, but it quickly created its own identity: stranger, nastier, and more obsessed with bodily decay. Fulci's zombies are not fast, stylish, or romanticized. They feel ancient, diseased, and unstoppable, like death itself rising from wet earth and ocean fog. Several sequences became legendary among horror fans, not because they were subtle, but because they seemed designed to test how much an audience could endure. That made the film a censorship magnet, especially during the video nasty era, where its title became shorthand for the kind of horror authorities wanted off shelves. But the bans only strengthened its legend. Zombie Flesh Eaters survives because it understands the dirty magic of exploitation cinema. Disgust can repel viewers, but if the image is strong enough, it also refuses to leave them alone. These films were condemned, cut, hidden, and sometimes treated like cultural poison. But the louder the outrage became, the harder people searched for them. That is the strange power of banned cinema. It turns disgust into curiosity and controversy into legend. Which of these films crossed the line the hardest, and which one should have stayed buried forever for good?